The gate closed behind them with a sound that had no business being so quiet. Iron on iron, a soft mechanical click, and then nothing. No slam, no drama, just the gentle finality of a lock engaging, the way expensive things always worked, the way people with money always did their cruelty, smoothly, without effort, without the decency of visible force. Ethan Cross stood on the outside of the Calloway estate, with his twins pressed against his sides, and his dog standing in front of all three of them like a wall that had decided it was not moving, and he listened to that silence for a moment before he made himself breathe. Snow was falling. It had been falling since before dawn, the kind that came in thick, heavy curtains that swallowed sound and turned the world into something muffled and cold, and very far from anything that felt like home. The driveway behind the gate was already buried under 3 inches of fresh white. The cedar trees lining the property shook under the weight of it, their branches bowing low, touching the ground in places, like old men who had given up standing straight. Ethan had lived through worse weather than this. He had spent 3 nights on a mountainside in Afghanistan in January with a broken radio and 2 men who were hurt badly enough that moving them was not an option and staying was not much better. He had not been afraid then. He had been cold and tired and working the problem the way he had been trained to work every problem, which was methodically, without panic, one decision at a time. He was not afraid now either, but he was something else. Something that did not have a clean name and that he was not going to examine in front of his children. Ivy, he said quietly. His daughter was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her mother's way of going very still when she was frightened, instead of making noise. She was pressed against his left side with her face turned into his coat and both of her hands gripping his jacket with a strength that 7-year-olds were not supposed to have. Owen was on his right. He was also 7, Ivy's twin by 4 minutes, which he considered a significant margin, and brought up regularly in situations where seniority seemed relevant. He was not going still the way his sister was. He was looking at the gate with his jaw set and his eyes dry, and the specific expression of a child who has decided that crying would be giving someone something they did not deserve. Ethan put a hand on each of their shoulders. The duffel bags they were carrying, overstuffed, heavy for their size, sagged against their legs. One of them had a drawing Ivy had done of their mother folded carefully inside. Ethan had watched her fold it and put it in the bag himself. Atlas stayed where he was, directly between the family and the gate. He was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 70 pounds of muscle and training, and absolute certainty about what his job was. His ears were forward. His tail was still. He was not growling, but the absence of growl from Atlas in a moment of threat meant nothing. It meant he was thinking. Behind the gate, James Calloway stood on the front steps of the house that had been in his family for 3 generations. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had been told his whole life that his presence filled a room and had come to believe it so completely that he could no longer distinguish between confidence and cruelty. He wore a gray coat that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. His hands were in his pockets. His face was the face of a man making a business decision. Beside him stood his wife, Margaret, who had not looked at Ethan once since she came out of the house. She was looking at the twins. Her expression was complicated in a way that Ethan did not have the capacity to parse right now. Their attorney, a man named Whitfield, who had driven up from the city that morning, stood slightly behind them both with a briefcase and the practiced blankness of someone paid to be present without being involved. "This is not what Claire wanted," Ethan said. He said it without heat. He was too tired for heat, and it would not have mattered anyway. James looked at him through the bars of the gate. "Claire is gone, Ethan. What she wanted is no longer the relevant consideration. She was my wife. She was my daughter." James's voice did not change. "She was our daughter for 29 years before she was your wife for 4. And those children are Calloway grandchildren, which means they belong here, in a stable environment, with family who can provide for them properly. Not in whatever situation you are going to drive them into this morning. I am their father. You are a man with a government pension, a combat-related disability rating, and no permanent address." James said each element of this like a verdict being read. "You have nightmares that wake your children. You have a dog that makes them nervous." Atlas had never once made the children nervous. The children slept with Atlas. The children had spent 2 weeks after Claire died refusing to go anywhere Atlas was not. Ethan did not say this. "You are not taking my children," Ethan said. "I am not taking them. James's voice was patient in the way that power was always patient. You are leaving them. There is a difference, and the courts will understand that difference very clearly when we explain it. Whitfield opened his briefcase and produced a document. He held it out through the gate bars. Ethan did not take it. You'll want to read that, Whitfield said. It's a petition for emergency guardianship. It was filed this morning. The hearing is in 10 days. Owen's hand found Ethan's, small fingers wrapping around his thumb. Ethan felt the grip and did not look down because if he looked down right now, he was going to lose the steadiness in his face that his children needed to see. Dad, Ivy said. Her voice was very small. Can we go now? It was not really a question. It was a child asking to be taken away from something that was hurting her. And it was the clearest instruction Ethan had ever received. He picked up the bag that had fallen from her hand. He turned away from the gate. He put his free hand on Owen's back and guided both of them toward the truck. Atlas fell into step beside them without being told, positioning himself on the side facing the estate, between the family and whatever was behind them. He did not look back. He watched forward, watching the road ahead the way he had watched roads in places where roads were dangerous. The truck was a 10-year-old blue Ford that had 200,000 miles on it, and a heater that took 4 minutes to actually produce heat, and a back seat that had a permanent indent from where Atlas always sat in the same spot. Ethan loaded the bags into the bed. He helped Ivy up into the back seat. Owen climbed up himself. Atlas jumped in beside them, and Ivy immediately put her arm around his neck and pressed her face into his fur. Ethan sat in the driver's seat. He put both hands on the steering wheel. He looked at the dashboard for a moment. The document Whitfield had tried to give him was an emergency guardianship petition. That meant James Calloway had already been to a judge. That meant this had been planned before today. That meant the gate closing and the attorney with his briefcase and the quiet, expensive finality of all of it had been orchestrated in advance. While Ethan was inside the estate grieving his wife, while his children were sleeping in their dead mother's childhood bedroom and calling it safe. He started the engine. The heater rattled on. Where are we going? Owen asked from the back seat. Ethan looked in the rearview mirror. His son was watching him with the expression he always used when he was trying to determine if the adults around him were handling things correctly. Atlas's amber eyes were also visible in the mirror, steady and attentive. Somewhere quiet, Ethan said. Somewhere we can think. He pulled out of the Calloway estate driveway and onto the county road that ran along the edge of the valley. Snow covered everything in both directions. The road ahead was white and empty and long. Claire had grown up in this valley. She had told him about it on their third date, sitting in a coffee shop in Fayetteville with her hands wrapped around a mug and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was talking about something she actually loved, which was light up from somewhere behind them in a way that made the room look different. She had described it as the most beautiful place she had ever been, and also the place she had needed most to leave. He understood that better now than he had then. The cabin where he was taking them was 20 minutes north of the estate. It belonged to a man named Ray Pruitt, a retired warrant officer who had done 2 tours with Ethan, in a context that meant they trusted each other the way men trust each other, when trust has been tested in circumstances that remove every reason to perform it. Ray had offered the cabin 3 days after Claire's funeral. Ethan had said no. 2 weeks later, standing outside the gate of the Calloway estate with his children in the snow, he was glad Ray had given him the key anyway. The cabin road was not plowed. Ethan took it slowly, feeling the truck slide and catch on packed ice beneath the fresh snow. The trees on either side closed in, pine and bare-limbed oak, the forest getting thicker as the road climbed slightly toward the ridge. Atlas sat up straight the moment the tree line closed around them. His nostrils worked. His ears moved independently, tracking sounds. What does he smell? Ivy whispered. Deer, probably, Owen said. He always does that in the woods. He does it when something is there, Ivy said. Not just deer. She was right about that. Ethan had learned to read Atlas the way pilots learn to read instruments, not as individual signals but as a whole system communicating a condition. Atlas at rest was one thing. Atlas alert with his ears working independently, and his nose moving in short, deliberate pulls, was another thing entirely. Ethan slowed the truck slightly. He looked at the tree line on both sides of the road. Snow moved in the wind. Branches shifted. Nothing specific presented itself. Easy, he said quietly. To Atlas or to himself, he wasn't certain. The cabin appeared through the trees at the end of a clearing. It was smaller than he remembered from Ray's description. one main room and a loft, a wood stove, a propane tank on the side that hopefully had something in it, a covered porch that had accumulated a foot of snow on its railing. It looked like the kind of place that had been weathered into permanence, not by design but by duration. He parked and they unloaded in the cold. Ivy held Atlas's leash, not because he needed it but because she needed to hold it. Owen carried the heaviest bag without being asked because that was who Owen was. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold wood and old smoke. Ethan found the wood stove and spent 10 minutes getting a fire started, while the twins sat on the floor with Atlas between them and their sleeping bags wrapped around their shoulders. The propane worked. He heated water and made instant oatmeal, which was not adequate as a meal or as a comfort but was warm and present, which was what he had to offer. They ate without talking much. The fire caught and began to push actual warmth into the room. Outside, the snow continued. "Dad," Owen said. "Yeah. What's an emergency guardianship?" Ethan looked at his son across the small table. He had known this was coming. Owen had been inside the Calloway house when Whitfield arrived that morning. He had been at the top of the stairs. Ethan had seen him there and had also seen the moment Owen understood enough of what was happening to go quiet in the specific way that meant he was processing it. "It means Grandpa James asked a judge to let him be in charge of you instead of me," Ethan said, "temporarily, while a court looks at whether I am taking good care of you." "Are you?" Ivy asked. She said it without accusation. She said it the way children ask questions they already know the answer to but need to hear spoken. "Yes," Ethan said. "Then why is he doing it?" Owen asked. "Because he can. Because he has money and lawyers, and because your mother is gone, and he thinks that changes things." "Does it change things?" Owen asked. "No," Ethan said. "You're mine. I'm yours. That doesn't change." Atlas put his head on Ivy's knee. She put her hand on top of his head without looking at him. Automatic. The way you reach for something you know will always be there. After the twins slept, Ethan sat by the wood stove with his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Ray, who answered on the second ring and said only "Good, you're there," and then listened while Ethan explained the petition. Ray said he knew a family attorney in the county seat, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had gone to law school after leaving the Army, and who Ray described as someone who treated courtrooms the way he had treated forward operating bases, which was as environments to be controlled rather than survived. Ethan said to send him her number. The second call was to his own attorney, a man in Fayetteville who had handled his disability rating appeal and who was not a family law specialist, but who could read a document and tell him what he was actually facing. He read the petition Whitfield had handed through the gate to his attorney over the phone, slowly, and his attorney listened without interrupting, and then said 3 things. That James Calloway had filed in a county where he had significant community standing. That the petition cited Ethan's PTSD diagnosis, his lack of permanent housing, and the presence of a large working breed dog as factors in the children's environment, and that Ethan had 10 days to respond. The third call was to a number he had not dialed in 14 months. His team sergeant, Marcus Webb, who had retired 6 months before Claire got sick and was now living outside Nashville doing something with land management that he had tried to explain twice, and Ethan still did not fully understand. Marcus picked up on the 4th ring with the specific voice of a man who answered calls from certain numbers, regardless of the hour or the circumstances. Ethan told him what had happened. All of it. Marcus was quiet through most of it. Then Marcus said, "You need to stay in that county. I know. Don't give them anything. Don't move the kids across any lines that give their jurisdiction an argument." "I know." "And Ethan." "Yeah, she didn't leave you with nothing." Marcus said it carefully. "Claire was smart. She was careful. She knew her family." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she was your wife for 4 years, and she knew what her father was capable of, and she loved those kids more than she loved anything on this earth." Marcus paused. "I'm just saying, don't assume you know everything she left behind." Ethan sat with that for a moment. "Get some sleep," Marcus said. "I'll be there in 2 days. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down and looked at the fire. Atlas had come to sit beside him at some point in the last hour, settling against his leg with the weight and warmth of a dog who had decided his handler needed company and had acted on that decision without waiting to be invited. Ethan put his hand on the dog's back. The cabin was quiet except for the fire and the wind and the sound of 2 children breathing in the loft above him. He had 10 days. He had no permanent address, a disability rating that James Calloway's attorney was going to describe in terms designed to frighten a judge, and a dog that the petition had specifically identified as a large and potentially unpredictable animal in the children's environment. He had a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and enough money in savings to last 3 months if he was careful, and 2 months if he wasn't. He also had the fact that he was their father, that he had been present for every fever and every nightmare and every school morning and every bedtime in the 4 years since they were born. That Claire had chosen him, specifically him, with full knowledge of his record and his diagnosis and his dog, and had married him, and built a life with him, and trusted him with the 2 most important people either of them had ever known. He also had something else. Something Marcus had said that was sitting in his chest with a weight that felt like meaning. She knew what her father was capable of. Claire had grown up with James Calloway. She had watched him operate for 29 years. She had left the valley at 22 and built a life at a deliberate distance from her family's money, and her family's expectations, and her family's particular way of turning love into leverage. She had married a man with a military salary and a used truck and a working dog, and she had done it fully aware that her father considered all 3 of those things inadequate. She had not been careless. She had not been naive. She was smart, Marcus had said. She was careful. Ethan looked at the fire for a long time. Then he looked at Atlas. The dog was watching him with the amber eyes that had been watching him through things that were much worse than this, through things that had no resolution, through things that had cost them both. There was no alarm in those eyes right now. There was attention. There was presence. There was the specific quality that Atlas always had, which was that he was entirely in the current moment and entirely committed to whatever the current moment required. Ethan thought about the last weeks of Claire's illness. He thought about the conversations they had managed in the spaces between pain and medication, and the ordinary logistics of dying that nobody prepared you for. He thought about the afternoon 3 weeks before the end, when she had asked him to go get coffee from down the hall, and he had come back to find her talking quietly to Atlas, who had climbed onto the bed beside her despite the hospital's policy, because hospital policy had not been something Atlas considered binding in that particular circumstance. He thought about what she had said when she saw him in the doorway. "He always knows," she had said. "Whatever needs finding, he always knows where to look." Ethan had thought she meant that Atlas had sensed she was upset, that he had responded to her emotion the way trained dogs responded to the emotional states of their handlers. That was true, and he had understood it that way. He was not sure anymore that was all she had meant. He stood up. Atlas stood with him. Ethan crossed to where the twins' bags were stacked near the door. He had packed them quickly, under pressure, grabbing what he could identify as essential. He went through them now, slowly, with the light from the wood stove and a flashlight he found on the cabin shelf. Children's clothes, books, Ivy's sketchbook, Owen's collection of small rocks that he had been assembling for 2 years, with a specificity of criteria that he had never fully explained. A stuffed rabbit that Ivy had declared she was too old for but had put in the bag herself. The photograph of Claire that Ethan had seen her fold. He went through everything twice. There was nothing that shouldn't have been there. There was nothing that suggested Claire had hidden something in her children's belongings. He sat back on his heels and thought, if she had left something, if she had prepared something the way Marcus implied she might have, where would it be? Not in the estate. James controlled the estate now. Not in their apartment in Fayetteville, which they had given up when Claire got sick, and they moved to the valley to be closer to her parents during treatment. Not in a bank account or a document anywhere obvious, because obvious was the first place a man like James Calloway would look, and Claire had known that. Atlas moved past him toward the far wall of the cabin. He sniffed along the baseboard. He turned and came back. He went to the door and sniffed at the threshold. He circled back to the center of the room and stood still, nose working, processing something. Then he moved toward the wood stove and stopped beside it. He put his nose to the floor. He looked up at Ethan. "What?" Ethan said. Atlas pawed at the floorboard once. It was an old cabin. The floors were original wood, pine planks laid a long time ago, uneven in places, the gaps between them wide enough to feel the draft from beneath. Ethan looked at where Atlas was standing. The board there was slightly different from the ones around it, slightly newer, slightly more level, as if it had been lifted and replaced at some point after the others. Ethan crouched down. He pressed the board with his palm. It moved. Not much. A fraction of an inch. But it moved. He found a gap at the edge with his fingernail. He worked it open slowly, the wood swollen from the moisture but coming up with steady pressure. Beneath it was a shallow space, maybe 4 inches deep, cut between the joists. And inside that space, Wrapped in a piece of oilcloth that had been taped shut and marked on the outside in handwriting he knew better than his own, was something Claire had put here. Ray's cabin. Claire had known about Ray's cabin. She had been here once, years before, when Ray and his wife had hosted a gathering for unit families. Back when Ethan and Claire were first married, and Ethan was still active, and the world had not yet arranged itself into the shape it had now. She had known about this place. She had known it was somewhere Ethan would go if things got bad enough that they needed somewhere to go. She had known, and she had been here, and she had left this. Ethan sat on the floor of the cabin, with the oilcloth package in his hands, and the fire casting orange light across everything, and Atlas sitting beside him with the patience of an animal who has been waiting for this moment, without knowing what it was and is now simply present for whatever it contains. He had 10 days. He had a petition filed by a man with money and standing and a plan. He had 2 sleeping children in the loft above him, who had already lost their mother and who were not going to lose their father. And he had whatever Claire had left under this floor. He opened it carefully. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to him in her handwriting, a flash drive in a small protective case, a folded document with the letterhead of an attorney he did not recognize, a name he would later learn was one of the most respected estate lawyers in the state, and underneath all of it, a business card, handwritten on the back in Claire's precise script, the words, "Ethan, the truth James has been hiding is larger than you know. Start here. Trust Atlas. He found it once before. He'll find the rest." Ethan read the card 3 times. The fire popped. Wind moved against the cabin walls. Above him, his children breathed in the deep, trusting way of children who believe, because they have been given reason to believe, that the person watching over them will not let anything happen to them. Ethan looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back at him with those amber eyes, steady and certain, and entirely unconcerned with the size of what was in front of them. "What did you find before?" Ethan said quietly. "What did she mean?" Atlas did not answer. He put his chin on Ethan's knee. Ethan opened the sealed envelope. Claire's handwriting filled the page in the careful, even lines she used when she was writing something she needed to get exactly right. "My love," she had written at the top. "If you are reading this, then my father has done what I always knew he would do, and you are facing it alone, and I am so sorry I could not stand beside you for it. But I did not leave you alone. I left you everything, and Atlas knows where the rest of it is. Let him lead you. He was there when I buried it, and he will remember. He always remembers." Ethan stopped reading. He looked at his dog. The amber eyes held steady. Outside, the snow fell thicker than before, covering everything, covering the road and the clearing and the trees along the ridge, covering the valley that Claire had grown up in and left and come back to die in, covering all of it in a silence that was not emptiness but accumulation, the slow, patient gathering of something that had been building for a long time and was almost ready to be found. Before we go further, if you have ever had someone love you carefully enough to protect you from something before it happened, leave a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from. And if this story is finding you at a moment when you need it, subscribe to this channel so the next story reaches you when it is ready. Stay with us. This is only the beginning. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at the small wooden table in the cabin with Claire's flash drive plugged into his old laptop, the screen casting pale blue light across his face, while Ivy and Owen slept curled together on the cot across the room. Atlas stretched out at their feet like a warm breathing wall between them and the rest of the world. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the silence it left behind was the kind that pressed against the windows, thick and heavy, like something waiting. The files on the drive were organized in folders. Claire had always been meticulous that way. Even in college, when Ethan had first met her, she color-coded her notes, kept 3 copies of everything, and never left anything to chance. He used to tease her about it, call her the most prepared person in any room. She'd laugh and say, "One of us has to be." He hadn't understood then how much she meant it. He was beginning to understand now. The first folder was labeled simply, "Ethan, read this first." He opened it. There was a single document inside, a letter. Her handwriting had been scanned in, not typed, and that detail alone made his throat close. He recognized the slight leftward tilt of her letters, the way she always looped her lowercase g too wide, the small heart she drew inside the capital E whenever she wrote his name in something personal. He read it slowly, the way you read something you're afraid to finish. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then something went wrong and I'm not there to explain it in person. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. But I need you to understand everything I'm about to show you. Everything I put on this drive. I did, because I love you, and our babies, more than I was ever able to say out loud. I've never been good with that. You always told me I kept too much inside. You were right, but I kept this inside to protect you. Now I need you to know the truth. He had to stop. He breathed. He looked over at the twins, at the soft rise and fall of Owen's chest, at the way Ivy's hand was tucked under her chin the same way Claire used to sleep. He kept reading. My parents, your in-laws, are not who you think they are. They are not the generous, dignified family they present to the world. The Callaway Foundation, the charitable work, the public image, all of it was built on something ugly. I discovered it 2 years before I got sick. I found documents in my father's study during Christmas the year Ivy and Owen turned 3. I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for the twins' birth certificates because Dad offered to put them in the family safe, and I wanted to make sure they were there. Instead, I found a ledger, and then I found another, and another. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Dad has been running a secondary financial operation for over 30 years. It's complex trusts, layered inside trusts, shell companies registered in Delaware, the Caymans, and 2 in Malta. The purpose, as far as I was able to piece together with the help of a private accountant I hired in secret, is to hold and conceal an estate that was never meant to be his. The estate belongs to my grandmother, your children's great-grandmother, Eleanor Voss Callaway. She was my mother's mother. She passed away when I was 12, and I barely knew her because my parents kept her at a distance. I thought it was a family personality conflict. It wasn't. Eleanor had a will. That will was altered. The original was destroyed. Dad controlled the probate process through a lawyer who has since retired and moved to Portugal. The estate that Eleanor intended to pass directly to her grandchildren, including me, and by extension, Ivy and Owen, was absorbed quietly into the Callaway family holdings. The estimate, Ethan, based on what I found, is that the concealed estate value is somewhere between $180 and $220 million. Most of it is in property, art, and trust accounts. Our children are the rightful heirs to a portion of that. Ethan sat back in the chair. His ears were ringing. $200 million. He read the paragraph again and again. He was not a man who misread things. 8 years in the Navy, 4 of them in SEAL teams, had trained him to read information calmly, neutrally, as data. But his hands were not calm. They were flat on the table and they were shaking. He kept reading. I hired a second lawyer not through any firm my parents have connections to. Her name is Diana Merritt. She is based in Portland, Oregon. She does not know my full name or my family name. I contacted her as Claire Voss, which was my grandmother's last name, and I told her I had a probate dispute involving a concealed estate. She agreed to review the documents. She has copies of everything I found, not originals, but certified copies. She also has the original thumb drive that the private accountant made for me, which contains the ledger photographs and the trust registration documents. Diana knows that if she ever receives a letter from me with a red seal on the envelope, just a plain red wax seal, nothing else, she is to begin formal proceedings immediately. Ethan, that red envelope is in the same box where I left this drive. I left it unsealed because I wasn't sure how to seal it without you noticing. You'll need to seal it and mail it. You'll know when. He thought of the box under the floorboard. He thought of the red envelope. He hadn't opened it yet. He pulled the flash drive from the laptop carefully, as if it were fragile, and held it in his palm. Such a small thing, barely the size of his thumbnail, and inside it, the entire architecture of a deception that had run for 30 years and cost Claire her inheritance, possibly her peace of mind, and God only knew what else. He stood up, walked to the corner of the cabin where he'd placed the wooden box. He knelt and opened it again. The red envelope was there, exactly as she'd described. Plain, cream-colored with a faint red seal impression on the flap. The wax not yet melted closed, just pressed lightly as a placeholder. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. A formal letter, again in Claire's handwriting, addressed to Diana Merritt, attorney at law, with a Portland address in the top right corner. The letter was brief. It identified Claire by her real full name, referenced the Voss estate, and instructed Diana to initiate proceedings on behalf of the estate's rightful heirs, identified as Ivy Rose Cross and Owen James Cross, minors, currently in the care of their father, Ethan Daniel Cross. It was signed, dated, witnessed by a notary stamp. The date was 18 months ago, 3 months before Claire died. She had done all of this while she was sick, while she was losing weight and losing sleep and trying to hold herself together long enough to see the twins through one more birthday. and she had said nothing, not a word, because she'd been protecting him from something he didn't even know existed. He held the envelope to his chest for a moment, not because he was sentimental, because he didn't know what else to do with the weight of it. Atlas lifted his head from the cot, watching Ethan with those steady amber eyes. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I know." He set the envelope on the table, opened his laptop, and started a new search. Diana Merritt, Portland, Oregon, estate attorney. She was real. She had a firm. Small. 4 attorneys. Clean website with a professional photo. Diana Merritt was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with a direct expression in her photo that Ethan appreciated immediately. She looked like someone who didn't enjoy being lied to. Good. He noted the office address and phone number. It was almost 2 a.m. He couldn't call until morning. But now he had a name, a direction, something concrete to move toward. He also now understood, with cold and sudden clarity, exactly why James Calloway had pushed so hard for emergency guardianship of the twins. It wasn't grief. It wasn't family loyalty. It wasn't even about Ethan or his military service or some trumped-up concern about his fitness as a father. It was about Ivy and Owen being living heirs to Eleanor Voss Calloway's estate. If James controlled the twins, he controlled any potential claim they might file. He could steer their legal affairs, delay proceedings, tie up challenges in court for years, and keep the estate buried under exactly the same layers of paper it had been hidden beneath for 3 decades. And if Ethan was out of the picture, removed by a court, declared unfit, deployed, discredited, there would be no one to challenge him. Ethan understood tactics. This was a campaign. James Calloway had been running it for years, without Ethan even knowing the war had started. That was about to change. He woke the twins at 7. They were groggy, Owen protesting with a dramatic groan that made Ivy giggle, which made Atlas wag his tail so hard he knocked Owen's blanket onto the floor, which made Owen groan louder and Ivy laugh harder. It was, for approximately 45 seconds, a perfectly normal morning. Then Owen looked up at Ethan's face and went quiet. Owen had always been like that. He was 6 years old, and he could read a room better than most adults. Claire had said he got it from Ethan. Ethan had said he got it from Claire. They'd never settled it. "Dad," Owen said. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," Ethan said, and he meant it technically. "But I need you two to get dressed and eat something because we're going to take a drive today." "Where?" Ivy asked, sitting up and immediately reaching for Atlas, who pressed his nose into her palm. "To find someone who can help us," Ethan said. He made oatmeal from the cabin's emergency supplies, dry packets. Not great, but warm. He made the twins eat every bite. He made sure Atlas had water and food. He packed everything back into the duffel efficiently, the way he packed in the field. Fast, methodical, nothing left behind, nothing wasted. Before he left, he sealed the red envelope. He used a candle stub from the cabin's shelf and a small pocket knife to drip red wax across the flap, pressing it flat with his thumb, leaving a thumbprint impression in the wax the way Claire's placeholder had suggested. It felt strangely ceremonial, like the formal close of something that had been waiting a very long time. He put the envelope and the flash drive into the inside pocket of his jacket, directly against his chest. Then he loaded the twins and Atlas into the truck and drove south toward Portland. The drive took 4 hours with a stop for gas and a bathroom break at a roadside diner where the twins ate pancakes with the focused intensity of children who had been eating emergency oatmeal and were now deeply grateful for syrup. Ethan drank 2 coffees and watched the parking lot from their booth. Old habit. He didn't unlearn things like that. He'd called Diana Merritt's office at 8 that morning from a payphone at the gas station. Yes, there were still a few, at older rural stations, and he'd made a note of the location when he passed it the previous evening, because that was also an old habit. The receptionist had taken his name, his callback number, a prepaid phone he'd bought at a convenience store, and told him that Miss Merritt would return the call within the hour. She had called back in 22 minutes. The conversation was brief. Ethan told her he was the husband of a woman who had contacted her under the name Claire Voss regarding a probate matter. He told her that Claire had passed away 6 months ago. There was a pause on the line, short and controlled, and then Diana Merritt said, "I've been waiting for this call." She asked where he was. He said he was driving to Portland. She said she would rearrange her afternoon. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't ask if he was okay. She asked what time he could be there and whether he had the sealed envelope. He told her he had it. She said, "Good. Don't let it out of your possession." He hadn't. Portland was gray and wet. The kind of wet that felt inhabited, not miserable, the streets busy with afternoon foot traffic, and the smell of coffee drifting out of a dozen doorways as Ethan navigated to the address he'd programmed into his phone. Diana Merritt's office was on the fourth floor of a brick building on a quiet street 1 block off the main commercial stretch. No signage on the building except a small brass plate at the entrance with the firm name. He left Atlas in the truck with the windows cracked 2 inches, told the twins to stay close, and walked them through the rain to the entrance. Diana Merritt met them in her waiting room personally. She was exactly as her photo suggested. Silver-haired, direct, a firm handshake that was not performing firmness but simply was it. She looked at the twins without the performative softness people often put on when they saw children in difficult circumstances, which Ethan immediately respected. She just looked at them the way she'd look at anyone as people, as facts on the ground. "This must be Ivy and Owen," she said. "Hi," said Ivy. Owen studied her for a moment, and then apparently decided she was acceptable, because he said, "Do you have a bathroom?" "Down the hall, second door on the left," Diana said without missing a beat. Her associate, a younger woman named Reyes, who introduced herself as Camila, took the twins to a small conference room with a puzzle set up on the table and a bowl of grapes. Ethan watched the door close behind them and then turned to Diana. "You have the envelope," she said. He took it from his jacket and handed it to her. She held it for a moment, turned it over, examined the wax seal. Then she looked at him. "She told me," Diana said, "when she first contacted me, that if this envelope ever arrived, it meant she hadn't been able to finish what she started herself, that it had fallen to you." She paused. "She also told me you were the most capable person she had ever known and that you would find a way through whatever was in front of you." Ethan said nothing. His jaw was set. Diana set the envelope on her desk. "Let me show you what she gave me." The documents were laid out across the conference table in a side room Diana used for evidence review. A long table, good lighting, no windows. The kind of room where you looked at facts without the distraction of weather or sky. Ethan stood at the head of the table and went through everything systematically. The ledger photographs first. Claire had photographed 37 pages of handwritten entries spanning 1989 to 2014. The entries were coded not heavily, just enough to create deniability in casual inspection, but the pattern was visible once you knew what you were looking at. Transfers. From trusts to operating accounts. Asset reclassifications. Property titles moved laterally between entities, so that ownership technically changed hands, while practically remaining controlled by the same person. Then the trust registration documents. 3 Delaware entities, 2 Cayman accounts, 2 Maltese registered companies, all with the same registered agent address a law office in Wilmington that Diana had already researched. The founding attorney of that firm had been disbarred in 2019 for unrelated fraud. The firm itself had dissolved. Then the original will. Not a copy, the actual signed, witnessed, notarized will of Eleanor Voss Calloway, dated October 1994, 3 years before Eleanor died. In it, Eleanor divided her estate equally among her 3 grandchildren, one of whom was Claire Marie Calloway, currently Claire Marie Cross. The estate was valued in the document at a combined property and financial asset estimate of $140 million at time of drafting. Given property appreciation in the intervening decades, Diana's preliminary estimation put the current value between $180 and $230 million. There was a second document, a codicil, dated 3 months after the original will, purporting to redirect the entirety of the estate to a charitable foundation controlled by the Calloway family. The codicil bore Eleanor's signature. Diana had a handwriting analysis on file. "The signature on the codicil," she said, "does not match Eleanor's authenticated signature on file with her original bank records from the same period. The deviation is significant, not slight stylistic variation. The expert I retained concluded with 92% confidence that it was not written by Eleanor Calloway." Ethan looked at the 2 signatures side by side. Even to his untrained eye, they were different. The original was fluid, confident, with the slight tremor of age but the muscle memory of someone who had signed her name the same way for 70 years. The codicil signature was deliberate, the kind of deliberate that was trying to look natural. "So the codicil is forged," Ethan said. "The analysis strongly suggests it," Diana said. "That's what a court will need to evaluate. And the original will makes Claire an heir. One of 3. Her 2 cousins are also beneficiaries under the original will. I've been unable to locate them yet." though I have a researcher working on it. One moved abroad sometime in the early 2000s, the other I don't have a current address. If Claire was an heir, Ethan said, and Claire is gone, then her portion of the estate passes to her direct descendants, Diana said, which are Ivy and Owen. The room was quiet for a moment. Ethan looked at the documents. He thought about his father-in-law, that controlled face at the gate, that clipped voice on the phone, the attorney in the suit with the emergency guardianship papers, the entire performance of grief and concern and family duty, and underneath all of it, this. 30 years of carefully maintained fraud being threatened by two 6-year-olds and their dead mother's flash drive. What do we do first? Ethan said. The envelope, Diana said. I open it formally, in front of you, as a witnessed instruction. Then I file a notice of intent to challenge probate in Oregon, which has jurisdiction because Eleanor's primary residence was in Portland at time of death. The notice puts the Callaway assets on legal hold during investigation. That means James Callaway cannot transfer, liquidate, or encumber any of the affected assets while proceedings are active. How long does that take to file? I can have it drafted tonight and filed electronically by 9 tomorrow morning. Does he get notified? His attorneys do, within 48 hours of filing. Ethan calculated the timeline. 2 days. James Callaway had been moving toward emergency guardianship. Once he was served with a probate challenge notice, he would know exactly what had been found. He would accelerate. He would use every resource he had to respond, to discredit, to delay. He has a lot of lawyers, Ethan said. I've been preparing for this case for 18 months, Diana said. I have more than lawyers. I have documentation that has already been reviewed by a forensic accountant and a handwriting expert. I have an evidence trail that does not have gaps, and I have a client whose interests are clear, whose identity is documented, and who is sitting 40 feet away eating grapes. She looked at him steadily. He has been keeping a secret for 30 years. Secrets require constant maintenance. They are fundamentally exhausting and fundamentally fragile. He is not in a stronger position than he appears. He is in a weaker one. Ethan looked at her. For the first time in days, possibly weeks, he felt the tension in his shoulders shift. Not release, not dissolve, but shift, the way weight shifts when someone else puts their hands on the other side of it. Okay, he said. There's one more thing, Diana said. She pulled a folder from the bottom of the pile. Claire included this in her original package to me. It's a timeline she wrote out by hand, everything she observed, found, and concluded, with dates. It's not a legal document. It's a personal record. She set it in front of him without opening it. She wrote a note on the front. I haven't read it. I didn't think it was mine to read. He looked at the folder, Claire's handwriting on the front tab. Just 4 words. For Ethan. Eventually, he picked it up and held it. He didn't open it. He would. But not here. Not now. Not in this clean, fluorescent room with someone watching. He would open it at night, when the twins were asleep, when Atlas had his head in his lap, when he could read Claire's words at the pace they deserved. He put the folder inside his jacket, next to where the envelope had been. They stayed in Portland that night. Diana's assistant Camila found them a family-friendly hotel 2 blocks from the office, and Ethan paid cash from the emergency fund he kept in the truck, another habit from his years in the field, always having 2 weeks of cash and a full gas tank and 3 days of food. He used to think Claire found it excessive. Now he thought she had probably understood it better than he realized. The room had 2 queen beds and a dog-friendly designation that Atlas appeared personally satisfied with as he circled twice and settled at the foot of the bed, where the twins had immediately claimed approximately 80% of the available surface area. Ethan sat in the chair by the window after they fell asleep. Rain on the glass, Portland streetlights turning the water on the pavement into orange and gold. He opened Claire's folder. The timeline was 41 pages, handwritten, dated, organized. She had started it in December, 3 years ago, the week after Christmas, the Christmas she'd found the ledger. She'd been methodical about it. What she found, when, how, what it meant, as far as she could interpret it. She'd cross-referenced dates. She'd noted conversations with her parents that, in retrospect, she'd recognized as management, her father redirecting, her mother deflecting, the careful choreography of people who were always keeping something managed. She'd written, toward the end of the timeline, a section she'd labeled simply "What I Know." He read it. I know that my father is not an evil man, in the way that word is usually used. He is not cruel for pleasure. He does not want people to suffer. But he is the kind of man who decided, at some point, that the rules were for other people. that his ability to manage things, to keep things orderly and prosperous, justified his control over them. He loves his family in the way that people love possessions. He wants us safe and presentable and nearby. He does not want us free. He was afraid of Eleanor. I think he resented her money because she gave it to her grandchildren instead of to him. He married into this family and he has never stopped feeling, somewhere deep and unexamined, that it was all supposed to become his. So he made it become his. And he told himself it was for the family. It probably helped him sleep. The tragedy is that if he had simply been honest, if he had been generous, if he had let Eleanor's will stand, there would have been enough for everyone. There is always enough if you don't need to control it all. I am telling you this not so you will hate him. I am telling you so that you understand him, and so that you can fight him without becoming him. Fight well, but fight clean. That's what you know how to do. He sat with those last lines for a long time. The rain kept going. Atlas shifted in his sleep, one paw twitching as if he were running. Ethan thought about James Calloway at the gate. The controlled voice, the tailored coat, the careful management of a scene he expected to control. He hadn't expected Claire to have already built the answer. He hadn't expected the twins to already be protected by their mother. From 18 months in the past, the way she had always been the most prepared person in any room. He closed the folder. Outside, Portland moved through its nightlights and rain and the quiet industry of a city continuing, indifferent and alive. Somewhere in that city, Diana Merritt was drafting the filing that would, by 9 o'clock the next morning, begin to dismantle 30 years of careful, quiet theft. And somewhere in a large house behind a wrought iron gate, James Calloway was sleeping without knowing that tomorrow, everything he thought was still manageable was about to become something he could not manage at all. Ethan didn't feel satisfaction at that. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the particular clarity that came before an operation. The stillness that was not the absence of tension but the mastery of it. Everything gathered in and directed forward. He had a direction now. He had a lawyer. He had documents. He had Claire's meticulous, extraordinary preparation. And he had his children, asleep 10 feet away, covered in hotel blankets, pressed against a dog, who had decided the moment they arrived that his job was to keep them safe. He would not let James Calloway near them. Not in a courtroom. Not through emergency guardianship. Not through any mechanism of control he had spent 3 decades perfecting. Ivy and Owen were Claire's children. They were Eleanor Voss Calloway's great-grandchildren. They had a right to what Eleanor had intended for them, not for the money, not even primarily for the justice, but because the people who came before them had meant to give them something, and that meaning deserved to survive. Tomorrow the filing would go in. The day after that, James Calloway would be notified. And the day after that, Ethan Cross would be ready. He set the folder down, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a while, listening to his children breathe. Then he picked up his phone and sent Diana Merritt a single message. File it. Her reply came back in 4 minutes. Already drafted. See you at 8. He put the phone down and closed his eyes. For the first time since the gate had swung shut behind him, he slept. Diana Merritt filed at 8:57 in the morning. Ethan was standing at her office window with a coffee cup in his hand when her associate Camila walked in and gave a single nod. That was it. No ceremony. No dramatic moment. Just a nod. And then the quiet understanding that something irreversible had just entered the world. The twins were in the waiting room with Atlas, who had charmed the entire office staff within 4 minutes of arriving. Ivy was explaining to Diana's receptionist, with great seriousness, that Atlas had once scared away 3 raccoons, and this made him braver than most people. Owen was eating a granola bar and examining the framed diplomas on the wall with the focused scrutiny of a child who was not yet sure what a diploma was, but was determined to figure it out independently. Ethan watched them through the glass panel of the office door. He thought, James Calloway has 48 hours before he knows. And then he thought, use those 48 hours well. He turned back to Diana, who was already moving, already pulling the next folder, the woman operating at a pace that suggested she had been waiting for this case, the way a runner waits at a starting line, not with impatience, but with everything coiled and ready. The notice goes to his attorneys of record, Diana said. I've identified 3 firms that have represented Calloway Family Holdings in the past decade. The notice goes to all 3 simultaneously. He cannot later claim he wasn't properly informed. What about the emergency guardianship filing? Ethan said. That's in family court. Separate jurisdiction. I've already contacted a colleague who handles family law. Her name is Patricia Howe. She's excellent. She'll file a response to the guardianship petition today, citing Ethan Cross as fit, present, and the legally established sole guardian of both children. Diana looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. You are the legally established sole guardian? Claire's will named me. We have documentation. Good. Patricia will need a copy. I have it in the truck. Diana almost smiled. Of course you do. He sent everything to Patricia Howe by noon. She reviewed it and called him back in 40 minutes, which told him everything he needed to know about her. She had a quick, organized voice, and she asked precise questions. And when he answered them, she moved immediately to the next one, without wasted time or reassurance. He appreciated that. He had spent years in rooms where wasted time was the difference between mission success and mission failure, and he had no patience left for people who padded conversations with softness they didn't mean. Patricia told him the guardianship hearing was scheduled for 11 days away. She would file today, request a continuance to allow time for the probate challenge to establish its foundation, and simultaneously petition the court to maintain the status quo, meaning Ivy and Owen remained with Ethan during the interim period. Will the judge grant that? Ethan asked. The standard is whether there is an immediate risk to the children in the current arrangement, Patricia said. You are their father. You have no criminal record, no history of neglect or abuse. You are a decorated veteran with an honorable discharge, and you are physically present and caring for the children right now. There is no immediate risk. The judge will maintain status quo. And Calloway's attorneys will argue that your current living situation is unstable. No fixed address, traveling, staying in motels. A brief pause. I'd recommend securing a stable residence in the next 72 hours. Somewhere you can point to on a map and say, this is where my children sleep at night. Ethan had already thought of this. He had a teammate from his SEAL days named Garrett Briggs, who had left the service 4 years ago and bought a small property outside of Bend, Oregon, 3 acres, a main house, a detached guest cottage that he rented out seasonally. Ethan had visited once, years ago, for a long weekend. He knew the address. He knew Garrett had the guest cottage empty through March, because he'd mentioned it in a text 2 months ago when they'd been catching up. He called Garrett after he hung up with Patricia. Garrett answered on the second ring, said nothing for a moment after Ethan explained the situation. Then he said, How long do you need it? At least through the hearing. Maybe longer. Take it as long as you need. The heat's already on. There's firewood stacked on the south side. Keys under the clay pot by the door. I'll pay you rent. I'll pay you rent. You will not, Garrett said, and then he hung up, because Garrett Briggs had never been a man who needed to make a speech out of generosity. They drove to Bend that afternoon. The guest cottage was small and clean and warm, with a wood stove in the main room and 2 bedrooms, and a porch that looked out over the property toward a line of ponderosa pines that caught the late afternoon light and turned it gold. Ivy stood on the porch for a full minute without saying anything, just looking. Owen found a basketball in the corner of the main room and immediately began dribbling it against the wooden floor until Ethan gave him a single look and he took it outside. Atlas inspected every room with professional thoroughness and then selected a spot near the wood stove and lay down as if he'd lived there for years. Ethan made dinner from the grocery bags he'd picked up on the drive-in. Nothing elaborate: pasta, jarred sauce, bread, the twins' specific brand of apple juice that Ivy had reminded him about 3 times since Portland, with the persistence of someone managing a critical supply chain. He sat across the small table from his children and watched them eat, and for a moment the weight of everything, the documents, the filings, the lawyers, the 48-hour clock, counting down on James Calloway's awareness, went quiet. Just the wood stove and the pasta and his kids arguing companionably about whether raccoons or squirrels were smarter, a debate that Atlas tracked with his eyes going back and forth between them like he was at a tennis match. After dinner, when the twins were asleep, Ethan sat on the porch in the cold and called his own parents. His mother answered. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 weeks, and he knew she'd been worried. The careful kind of worried that she kept at a measured distance because she'd been a military spouse and then a military parent, and she'd learned decades ago that worry without action was just noise. She listened to everything he told her without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Claire knew you'd handle it. I know. He said, Do you need us to come? He thought about it honestly. Not yet, but soon maybe. I'll tell you when. Okay. A pause. How are the babies? They're good. They had pasta. There's a basketball. He heard his mother exhale, not quite a laugh, but something close to it. Call me tomorrow. He said he would. He meant it. The 48 hours passed. On the morning of the second day, Diana called him at 7:15. He's been served, she said. How do you know already? Because his lead attorney called me 40 minutes ago. A brief pause, the kind that contained something. They want a meeting. What kind of meeting? The kind where they offer something and hope you'll take it and make this go away. Ethan stood at the cottage window. The pines were dark against a white sky, frost still on the ground in the shadows where the morning sun hadn't reached. What do you think they'll offer? He said. A settlement. Some fraction of the estate value, probably framed generously. Probably designed to look reasonable while being structured in a way that protects most of what Calloway has. They'll have their forensic accountants put the best face on the numbers. They'll suggest that a long legal battle won't serve the children. They'll say they want what's best for the family. And what do you recommend? Diana was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, the pause of someone who had already thought about this carefully and was now giving him the real answer rather than the comfortable one. I recommend you sit in the meeting and listen. Let them talk. Don't commit to anything. Let me respond to their attorneys in writing afterward. Another pause. But Ethan, I want you to understand something before you walk into that room. Your father-in-law is going to look at you across a table, and he is going to speak to you about family, about Claire, about the children. He is a man who has spent 30 years managing things through force of presence and controlled narrative. He will try to do that again. You need to be ready for it not to affect your legal position, regardless of how it affects you personally. Ethan said, I've sat across tables from worse. I believe you, Diana said, but those men weren't married to your daughter. He didn't answer that, but he heard it. The meeting was in Portland, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building made mostly of glass. Ethan drove up the morning of, left the twins with Garrett, who had offered without being asked, and brought Atlas in the truck because he always drove better with Atlas in the passenger seat. James Calloway was already in the room when Ethan arrived. He looked older than he had at the gate 3 weeks ago. Not dramatically, a man like James Calloway did not permit dramatic deterioration, but there was something in the quality of his stillness that was different. Before, at the gate, he had been in complete command of his stillness. Now, it was something he was working to maintain. There were 2 attorneys flanking him. Diana sat beside Ethan. Camila sat on Diana's other side with a legal pad. Nobody shook hands. James Calloway looked at Ethan for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was measured and low, the voice of a man who had learned that soft tones communicated control more effectively than loud ones. I'd like to begin, James said, by saying that nothing about this situation is what I wanted. Ethan said nothing. Claire, James continued, and he paused on her name in a way that might have been grief and might have been strategy and was probably both. Made decisions in the last years of her life that she didn't fully discuss with her family. I understand she felt she had reasons. I also understand those reasons were based on an incomplete picture. Your attorneys can speak to the documentation, Diana said. I'm speaking to my son-in-law, James said, and his eyes moved back to Ethan. Man to man. Father to father. Ethan looked at him steadily. He thought about what Claire had written. He is not cruel for pleasure. He wants people safe and presentable and nearby. He does not want them free. Say what you came to say, Ethan said. James Calloway laid his hands flat on the table. Composed, deliberate. I am prepared to establish a trust for Ivy and Owen valued at $22 million. Structured, managed, dispersed at 18, clean and protected. That is more money than those children will ever need. It is a genuine offer. In exchange, the probate challenge is withdrawn. The guardianship petition is withdrawn by mutual agreement, and we move forward as a family. WAG. The room was quiet. $22 million, against a probable $200 million in concealed estate value. Ethan looked at James Calloway's hands on the table. Controlled. Everything always controlled. He thought about Eleanor Voss Calloway, who had written a will in 1994 with clear intentions for her grandchildren, who had died without knowing that her intentions would be quietly erased by the man who had married into her family. He thought about Claire, photographing ledger pages in secret while she was sick, building an evidentiary record she would never live to use herself. He thought about Ivy explaining Atlas's bravery to a receptionist. He thought about Owen reading diplomas on a wall. He looked up at James Calloway. No, he said. James held his gaze. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger, not quite. The recalibration of a man who had expected a different answer. You should think carefully. I've thought, Ethan said. Eleanor Voss Calloway's will said what it said. Claire found what she found. Diana has what she has. We'll let the court read all of it. He leaned forward slightly. You've had 30 years to manage this. That's done now. James Calloway looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his attorneys. And the meeting was over. The case moved the way legal cases move, not in dramatic rushes but in increments, filing by filing, hearing by hearing. The slow and grinding machinery of courts doing the work that 30 years of concealment had made necessary. Patricia Howe secured the status quo order in family court on the 5th day. The guardianship petition filed by James Calloway was stayed pending resolution of the probate challenge. Ivy and Owen stayed with Ethan. The forensic accountant Diana had retained presented preliminary findings to the probate court 6 weeks into proceedings. The handwriting expert testified. The original will was authenticated. The codicil was formally identified as inconsistent with Eleanor Calloway's verified signature samples. 3 months in, James Calloway's lead attorney contacted Diana with a revised offer. It was significantly higher than the first. 4 months in, they made contact again. Ethan told Diana each time, no. Not because he was punishing anyone, not because the money was the point, but because Claire had been clear, and Eleanor had been clear, and the law, when it finally had the chance to read what had been hidden from it for 3 decades, was also clear. 7 months after Diana filed that first notice, the probate court ruled. Eleanor Voss Calloway's original will was valid. The codicil was invalidated on grounds of signature fraud. The estate, reassessed at current market value, was placed into structured disbursement. 1/3 to Claire's portion, held in trust for Ivy and Owen Cross. 1/3 to each of Eleanor's other 2 grandchildren, whose whereabouts had by then been established through Diana's researcher, one living in Edinburgh, one in Vancouver, both of whom had spent decades unaware that an inheritance had ever existed. The number that went into trust for Ivy and Owen was $68 million. Not $200 million, not the full amount Claire had estimated, but Eleanor's actual estate, legally verified, justly distributed, reaching the people she had always meant it to reach, 30 years late. James Calloway did not go to prison. The statute of limitations on some of the underlying fraud had run. His attorneys were thorough. But the civil judgment against the Calloway family holdings was substantial. The reputational damage was significant and public, and the foundation that had been built on the concealed estate was restructured under court supervision. He did not attend the final hearing. Ethan was sitting on the cottage porch in Bend when Diana called with the ruling. The twins were in the yard. Ivy had found a stick and was explaining something to Atlas with great authority, while Owen attempted to teach himself a cartwheel with the kind of cheerful incompetence that suggested he would eventually figure it out through sheer repetition. He listened to Diana read the summary of the ruling. He thanked her. He sat for a while after he hung up, watching his kids in the afternoon light, the pines at the edge of the property, catching gold the way they had that first evening. He thought about Claire. Not the flash drive or the documents or the carefully constructed evidentiary record, just Claire, laughing at the way he packed his go-bag, sleeping with her hand tucked under her chin, writing 41 pages by hand while she was sick because she needed to make sure that when the time came, the people she loved would be okay. She had known he'd find the box. She'd left it where Atlas would lead him, because she knew Atlas would not leave a cent alone, and she knew Ethan would follow whatever Atlas found, and she knew that in the worst moment, the gate swinging shut, the truck pulling away, nowhere to go, he would end up somewhere quiet where the floor could be lifted. She had built him a road out of the dark and hidden it under the floorboards, and trusted him to find it. He stood up from the porch chair. Owen had almost gotten the cartwheel. He was close now, just slightly mistiming the rotation. Ivy had abandoned the stick and was watching her brother with her arms crossed and the analytical expression that was so completely Claire that it stopped Ethan's breath for a second, the way it still sometimes did. He walked down the porch steps and into the yard. "Watch your hand placement," he told Owen. "Your right hand's too far forward." Owen looked at him. "You know cartwheels?" "I know a lot of things," Ethan said. He adjusted Owen's hand position. Owen tried again. This time he made it all the way around, landing unevenly but landing, and he immediately turned to his sister with an expression of total triumph. Ivy gave a small, dignified clap. Atlas wagged his tail, and Ethan Cross, who had driven away from a closed gate with nothing but 2 children and a dog and a truck and $37 in his pocket, stood in the last of the afternoon light and felt something he hadn't expected to feel for a very long time. He felt like they were going to be all right. If this story moved you the way it moved us writing it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. A friend, a parent, a veteran, anyone who is fighting a quiet battle and needs to know that the road out exists even when you can't see it yet. Drop your dog's name in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is built for stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when everything is on the line. We'll see you in the next one.